You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
What if I told you Ohio State would lose its Hall of Fame coach and a record-setting quarterback that put in undoubtedly the greatest passing season in Ohio State history, and yet, as of right now, as we record this on December 20th, 2018, some of you probably listening to this December 21st, 2018 or later, but there is a good chance that Ohio State football will not miss a beat. Let that sink in. Chew on that. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, everybody. Good Friday. I am your host, Kyle Lamb. We are brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. So, look, Ryan Day has huge shoes to fill. You know, Urban Meyer is a legend for a reason. Not just because of all of the games he's won on the field, but because of the relentless recruiting that he has done to put the talent on that field. And the biggest question I thought coming in when it was announced a couple weeks ago that Urban was stepping down and Ryan taking over, the biggest question for me was, how would he recruit? Now, look, we don't have a lot of results yet, okay? But what if I said it this way? Ryan Day has lost a battle. Literally, he lost the battle. You know, Jordan Battle, the defensive back from St. Thomas Aquinas down there in Florida. Okay, that is the only recruit that he has lost thus far. And it's not a big class to begin with, but the fact he was able to retain the rest of this 2019 class, Doug Nestor right now is kind of an asterisk because we don't know what he's going to do. He did not sign in the early signing period. He's technically committed to Ohio State, or so he says, but he's also going to take some visits, and then will sign in the late signing period. Whether that's with Ohio State or Virginia Tech or Penn State, we'll have to see. But the rest of the class thus far, Ryan Day has been able to rescue. Okay, he lost the battle. That was a big, flip, battle going to Alabama and signing with the Crimson Tide. There's no sugarcoating it. That's a disappointing loss. But if I were to tell you, on the heels of the win against Michigan and then the Big Ten championship against Northwestern, if I had told you all, Urban Meyer would step down, Ryan Day would take over, but they are going to retain the rest of the recruiting class except for Jordan Battle and also gain Zach Harrison along the way. I think every single one of you would have been absolutely thrilled with that, because to me, that's for him to be able to do that in a short period says a lot. It means that his reputation had already been established. These recruits believe in him, and I believe that means a lot of success for future recruits. But the big topic of the show today, and I will talk a little more recruiting later in the show, but the big topic, if you've been paying attention to Ohio State football news this week, either on Twitter or on one of the many message boards out there, BuckeyeGrove.com, obviously on the Horseshoe Lounge, we've been discussing it a lot. Justin Fields, he is a former 5-star recruit. He was the number 1 rated quarterback in the country, number 2 overall on the Rivals Network, signed with Georgia, and was a freshman this past season. Of course, he played in a backup role. Jake Fromm, of course, already established there, led Georgia to the national championship game last season as a freshman. And so Justin Fields had an enormous obstacle in front of him to take over as quarterback at the University of Georgia. And, Fromm has done very well. He has not given Georgia a reason to replace him. They played Fields as a backup. They put him in some run situations, RPOs, some read option situations, goal line, red zone opportunities. They tried creative ways to get him in the game and keep him happy. But at the end of the day, of course, news came out this week that he is looking to transfer. What we know so far is that he is in the NCAA portal, and that is basically a database of potential transfers. That is a new rule. It just started this year. He is in the database, and that means schools can contact him. And so the report has come out that Ohio State and Oklahoma and Florida State are the schools that he is most interested in. A little background here, if you're not familiar with the situation. Fields shares a quarterback coach, a quarterback instructor in the offseason with Dwayne Haskins. So these two have become kind of close. I mean, they're not best of friends, but they are on a very cordial first-name basis, and they talk every so often. And so that shared quarterback coach has a relationship established. And this guy has said on his Twitter account, if he ever has a son playing quarterback, he wants him to play for Ryan Day. You know, that's how strongly he feels about Ryan Day. So there is already an established trust there. Fields, I believe, has a lot of faith in Ryan Day. He's seen what became of Dwayne Haskins this year as a quarterback. He's read the press clippings. He knows how his coach feels about him. So there's a rapport there. And so we know Fields is going to be transferring. There's a really good chance that will happen. And Ohio State, according to reports, seems to be the leader for Fields. I can't offer a lot of guaranteed, insight here. I can't guarantee where he's going. But I will say this. I think that Fields is going to wind up at Ohio State. It seems to be trending that way. Now, here in just a few minutes, Jake Ruse, he is a recruiting analyst for UGAsports.com here on the Rivals Network. He is going to be joining us, and I'm going to ask him flat out. I'm going to ask him about Fields as a prospect. What's the hype around him? We're going to talk about his passing and his running style. He's going to tell us about character and leadership qualities of Fields. What kind of kid would Ohio State be getting here if Fields decides to transfer to Ohio State? We'll discuss timeline. When might he make a decision? We'll get into all that with Jake and Ross Fulton, our own Ross Fulton of BuckeyeGrove.com. We'll discuss kind of the schematics. What does Ohio State do with the offense if Fields comes? And of course, the other issue here, and this is driving a lot of the topic of this conversation. A lot of this conversation is being driven by what becomes of Tate Martell. And before Jake joins us, this is the part I want to talk about because this is interesting to me. Look, I'm going to say something that a lot of people would be afraid to say with any gusto. They're not going to go out with too strong an opinion, and I'm just going to come out and be honest with you. I think Tate Martell is an exceptionally talented kid. I think he's got a high ceiling. If he sticks it out, if it works out that Fields goes elsewhere and Tate sticks it out at Ohio State, Martell could very well wind up being a very, very good quarterback for Ohio State. But that being said, I think there are legitimate issues. I don't think that Ryan Day is sold on Tate Martell as a passer. And I think that you could probably read into the fact when Tate got into the game there late in the season several times, they were afraid to throw him in situations. They ran him a lot, but they were afraid to throw him. I think there are issues with consistency with Tate as a passer. I think, him making reads and just delivering a timely, accurate ball with consistency, I think there is a lot of issues there. And you got to remember, Matthew Baldwin is Day's guy. Okay, Day discovered Baldwin. He's been watching him for a year or two. He has a lot of faith in Baldwin's ability. And I think that Baldwin is ahead of Tate as a passer by a long shot. And I think as of right now, even though you would go into a season thinking that Tate would have the upper hand to start, I think with Justin Fields not in the equation, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Tate would start over Baldwin, because I think Ryan Day specifically probably regards Baldwin a little higher in the pecking order than Tate. And some of that is the off-the-field stuff. It's not that Tate isn't a hard worker, but they really have to work overtime to keeping him involved and engaged. And I think Baldwin is just more maybe more of Day's cup of tea right now. And that's not to say, Tate can't work out and won't work out. That's not to say Tate won't be a successful starter and beat out Matthew Baldwin if the competition comes down to those two next year. But I think right now, Matthew Baldwin is being discounted quite a bit and maybe exceptionally too much by Ohio State fans because I don't think it's a given that Tate would be a starter next year. I really don't. But that being said, the crux of the issue comes down to, is Justin Fields worth the squeeze? Is the juice worth the squeeze here? And I think the answer is yes, in my opinion. I think Fields is an exceptional talent. And it's funny, Dwayne Haskins is kind of a generational talent as far as quarterback at Ohio State, as far as passing the ball. Ohio State has had some great quarterbacks, great college quarterbacks. J.T. Barrett was a great college quarterback. Terrell Pryor was a great college quarterback. Braxton Miller, when healthy, was a great college quarterback. Bobby Hoying, back in the 90s, very, very good college quarterback. They have had some exceptional guys play the position through the years in Columbus. But what they have not had, really since, you have to go back 40 years to Art Schlichter, they have not had a guy come in with the credentials outside of maybe Dwayne Haskins, who was even a little bit raw when he first came in, but they have not had, other than Haskins, a guy with this kind of arm talent that they would be getting in Fields. They just haven't had it, and it's very ironic because all those years, if you think back, Ohio State fans have long complained, well, what is Ohio State missing? The one thing they have been missing is that 5-star quarterback. And I use 5-star term because I realized Pryor and Miller were 5 stars, but they were dual threat guys that were 5 stars because of their playmaking ability. They have not had a true 5-star pocket passer come in really since Art Schlichter. And Haskins put up a phenomenal season, but the irony here is if Fields picks Ohio State, it's all of a sudden because of Day's reputation. Day is He's quickly skyrocketing to the top of the charts in terms of perception. And he's like, it's funny, Jim Harbaugh was supposed to be the quarterback whisperer. And we're finding out, at Michigan, he's done a good job with his quarterbacks. But the idea that Jim Harbaugh could mold these guys into super stud quarterbacks is just kind of diminished. But now, Ryan Day is the one getting the hype. After the season that Dwayne Haskins just turned in, if Ohio State can turn around and land Justin Fields, you got to do it because not only does Fields give you the type of ceiling that Haskins gives you, that kind of elite top 5 NFL quarterback type ceiling, it also paves the way for the future for all of a sudden Ohio State can start becoming the destination school for 5-star quarterbacks. They've already got Jack Miller committed for 2020. They can really get some momentum going here. If Justin Fields comes to Ohio State, if he's granted the waiver for immediate eligibility, and I know some of you are asking that question, that is going to be based on the NCAA is going to have to hear his case, and he has to appeal to get an immediate eligibility. And it's going to be based on a racial epithet that was hurled his direction by a baseball player at the University of Georgia that has since been kicked out of school for that incident. They will hear his case and determine if that is the type of situation out of his control. It has to be out of an athlete's control and has to basically be the impetus for why a guy needs to move on to a different institution. And they're going to hear that. And if Justin Fields is granted the waiver, he comes to Ohio State, he's going to have at least 2 years of eligibility remaining. He'll actually have 3 years of eligibility, but he'll be there for at least 2 years because he can't leave for the NFL draft for at least 2 years is what I'm trying to say. But if that happens and he puts up those kind of numbers, then all of a sudden you're looking at Ohio State being in a position where they have proven themselves offensively with a bona fide passing dual threat quarterback for 3 straight years. I mean, Haskins wasn't really a dual threat necessarily, but what I'm saying is for 3 straight years, they will have passed the mustard as far as passing quarterbacks. So this is a big opportunity, and no matter what you think of Tate Martell, and he is a playmaker with the potential of also being a good passer in his career, I think this is something you got to do if you're Ohio State. Puts them at another level potentially that they've only had really for one season in Ohio State football history, and that is Dwayne Haskins this past year. Because Fields has that kind of potential. So, this is really a great opportunity for Ohio State. The question is going to be, if Ohio State gets Justin Fields, how does Tate Martell respond? Does he stick around and try to compete for the job, or does he, head out the door, which is going to leave them very thin in numbers, especially if Fields does not get a waiver to be immediately eligible. That's going to put them down to Matthew Baldwin on the roster, and then they're going to have to go find some grad transfers for immediate help because that puts them in an uncomfortable position. So it's not without risk. Make no mistake. Taking Justin Fields is not without its risk, but it is a high risk yet very high reward scenario. I'm interested to see how this plays out. But let's get some more insight here from Jake Roos because he is a recruiting analyst for UGAsports.com. He's covered Fields for the last couple of years as a high school prospect and, of course, saw him down in Athens this year as a freshman quarterback at Georgia. So let's get some insight here on the situation. So let me first start. I want to ask you, for those that have not seen a lot of Justin Fields, and he played, a little bit here and there for Georgia on select drives, some red zone situations, a lot of zone read stuff. But for those that really didn't get to see Fields much, if at all, this year, take me back a little bit and describe Justin Fields' game and why there is so much hype around him for people that may say, well, he wasn't good enough to start this year, but obviously Jake Fromm is a big reason for that. But kind of explain Fields' game and why there is so much hype.
I think the big thing about Justin is how far he's evolved over the course of his career as a passer. We saw him early in his career, and he was always a fantastic scrambler. There was no doubt about that. We knew that he was a big physical athlete, a fast guy. But the throwing motion just was a little stilted coming into his junior year. But he really worked the mechanics out on that, and by summer going into his senior year, had really elevated himself as one of the top passers, I think, in the nation. A kid who can absolutely sling it. So obviously, that's the combination that everybody wants. In college football these days, you want a big physical guy who can get out there and sling it, or make a play with his legs if things break down. And Justin certainly brings both of those aspects to the field. I think that his career at Georgia, we saw a little bit of that. It was mostly focused on his running ability, but he got out there and uncorked a couple that I think really opened a few people's eyes.
Yeah, he is known, obviously, as a dual-threat quarterback. He is a great runner. He averaged 6.3 yards per attempt here in limited action this year. What would you describe his running style? When he runs the ball, I think a lot of people this year were blown away, obviously, by Kyler Murray's, running. He's on another level, and I know Justin Fields is not that type of athlete, but how would you describe his running?
I think he's pretty fearless. That would probably be the word I'd use when he decides to take off. Justin is, he's certainly not as big as Cam Newton height-wise, but he's similarly thick. And I think that gives him a lot of confidence that, he can take a lick and just keep on rolling. And I think that, when he pulls the ball down, he's got nothing in his mind but going as far as he can. He's not a guy who likes to slide. He's willing to take the contact and try to push forward for as many yards as he can when he takes off.
Jake, anytime you get a kid, transfer out so quickly, there's always going to be the natural knee-jerk reactions from folks, questioning his integrity, questioning his leadership, those kinds of things. How would you describe his intangibles and how he fit into the program in year one there at Georgia?
I think that the fit was a bit tough. I think that coming out of high school, being the number 2 quarterback in the nation, a guy with so much hype around him, the expectations were just so huge. And I do think he wanted to be at Georgia. I don't think that was quite the issue. I think it was just that, Jake Fromm fits what they're doing right now offensively better than what Justin would or did at the time. And I think that, he kind of saw the writing on the wall that going into year two, you're going up against a junior quarterback who's produced two SEC championship appearances, beat Florida twice, took you to the national championship. I think the writing on the wall for the direction the offense wanted to take was there. And so, I think outside of that, though, Justin's a very polite kid, well-mannered, a good kid, comes from a good family that is very involved in his athletic career and takes a great interest in that. He's a very solid young man. I could see how he got a little perhaps perturbed with the way he was used this past year, in Georgia's system, just because I think he felt like he could have done more, and I think a lot of people felt like he could have done more. But, for what Georgia's trying to do offensively and the success that they've had with Jake Fromm, it's just hard to go away from that right now. So I think that, that made it a tough fit for Justin.
What's your feel on this transfer? Is this it seems Georgia is treating this as if they do believe he's gone. I know he's in the NCAA portal and teams are allowed to reach out to him now. Is there any feeling he could change his mind, reverse course, and return, or do you feel like this is, pretty far down the road?
Yeah, I feel like we've kind of reached a point where it seems highly unlikely that he would be coming back. Certainly he's got the opportunity if he wants to. I'm sure Georgia would love to have another guy or have him come back into the fold. But their actions on signing day kind of pointed to the fact that they're probably expecting him to move on. Two early enrolling quarterbacks coming in mid-year, Dwan Mathis, who Ohio State fans are very familiar with, obviously, and then Stetson Bennett, who was a former walk-on in Georgia, went and played some JUCO ball last year. Now he's back on scholarship. I think that Georgia's made it pretty clear that they see what's going on in this situation, and they've kind of hedged their bets accordingly. But if he were to decide otherwise, I think that they probably would take the opportunity to bring him back and work things out. He's that kind of athlete that bears that kind of attention and consideration.
Yeah, and you mentioned Mathis, and it would be kind of an amusing storyline with Mathis flipping and signing with Georgia on signing day, and then Ohio State is thought to be the leader here for Fields, so you could wind up seeing a sort of quasi-trade here. What can you tell us about that? Ohio State, up here, it is thought to be the leader. Of course, he shares the quarterback trainer in the offseason with Dwayne Haskins, and there have been a couple reports out as recently as today, actually, about maybe Ohio State being the leader. Do you think that is the case? And if so, what other teams do you see being involved here?
I don't know that I have a good feel for a leader just yet. I do think that I've heard the most buzz around Ohio State, so that would make the most sense. But, I hesitate to go out on a limb and call anyone a leader just yet. Oklahoma's the other one that I've heard mentioned probably most frequently, and then behind that, probably Florida State. So I think that it's probably between those three programs, but just based on everything we've heard. And I think that he would be a great addition to any of those three. Wherever he lands, I think he'll make a huge impact and be a guy who's able to contribute early in his career.
If this winds up coming to fruition that he transfers out, what kind of timing are you looking at here? It would make sense that he would want to be enrolled for the next semester at whatever school he picks. Do you see any kind of decision coming before the Orange Bowl, or do you think it'll come after that?
I think it could go either way. I really do. I think that the way things are pointing right now, I would be surprised if he did end up playing in the bowl game, or traveling with Georgia, just because I think the relationship right now is pretty stilted, as you might imagine. But certainly the possibility exists, and they may want him to fulfill his obligations through that. So a little unclear on that timeline right now, but my gut feeling as of today is that he'll have a chance to start looking around before that.
Jake Ruse, he is a recruiting analyst for UGAsports.com. You can catch him also on Twitter at Ruse Recruiting. That is REUSE Recruiting. Jake, I appreciate you taking the time, man. That was good stuff, and best of luck to you, buddy.
All right, appreciate it, Kyle. Anytime, man.
So thanks again to Jake for taking the time out of his schedule to share that information with us. I hope everybody found that insightful. I would like to get kind of the other side of the situation now. I'm going to bring in Ross Fulton, and we're going to talk about how Fields would fit in Ohio State's system and, what he thinks of Fields not only as a passer but a runner. And, of course, there's the flip side, too. What happens if Fields does not wind up at Ohio State or is not immediately eligible? Because that's the doomsday scenario, I think, for a lot of people is, what happens if Fields goes elsewhere and Tate Martell transfers out? So that's the side I'm also interested in hearing from Ross. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of how that dynamic would work out.
Ross Fulton is here with his whiteboard to break down what the Buckeyes and their opponents are doing on the field. Can't see the whiteboard? Close your eyes and imagine really hard. It's time to go inside the X's and O's with Ross.
Pain heals. Chicks dig scars. Glory lasts forever.
All right, Ross is with me now, and we're going to talk a little bit of Justin Fields. We can get into the Rose Bowl stuff at another time, probably break it down with Kirk and Ross like usual afterwards. But this December, boy, I tell you what, Ross, it has not been short on things to talk about that are non-bowl related, right? I mean, we get Urban Meyer stepping down, we get, all the recruiting stuff, Zach Harrison committing signing day, and now we get the Justin Fields rumors on top of that. So this has been, it's keeping me busy as a podcast host here with things to talk about. First, before we get, I want to ask you some scheme-related questions, but off the top, I'm curious your take on the Justin Fields scenario and the possibility of him transferring to Ohio State.
So I have to say off the bat, I've seen limited amounts of Justin Fields. I know that people who, Mark Givler and others who follow recruiting think very, very highly of him. I think obviously that he had some impact as a true freshman. And I would say that, I think Ryan Day and Ohio State's actions speak pretty loudly here in terms of their interest in him.
So, let me ask this. From what you have seen of him, how does is he a guy that basically plugs and plays into the system that Ohio State would like to run, either based on what you saw with Dwayne Haskins this year or what you expect from Ryan Day going forward? Is he a plug-and-play guy, do you think, and somebody that can step into that right away and them being able to put the full brunt of the offense in with him?
I do. So I think that the difference between anything under Ryan Day as compared to Urban Meyer would be shades of gray. They're still a spread offense. And to me, you are on a sort of quarterbacks within a spread offense can be on a spectrum. I think personally my take, and we talked about this obviously extensively during the season, is that it is very helpful to at least have some running thread from your quarterback. I think the last month of the season showed, even from when Dwayne Haskins just did that a little bit, how much of a difference that makes. Then you can take it all the way to the other side where you have someone like JT Barrett or Braxton Miller, who is perhaps probably the thing that teams worried the most about with them was their running ability as opposed to their throwing. I think to me, the ideal spread quarterback is someone like Deshaun Watson, who can make all the throws, is a pocket passer, but at the same time is athletic enough to both run read plays, and then when you're down in the red zone, you can use him on an occasional designed run with a quarterback counter tray, quarterback power. So it's not your bread and butter, but it adds that 11-on-11 element. And all of that is to say that I think in the best case scenario, Justin Fields fits that role. He is a much better runner than a Dwayne Haskins, but he has the passing upside that's, to me, beyond a Barrett or Braxton Miller. He's a big, strong guy who has a nice throwing motion and can make all the throws. I do think that it's going to be a bit of I think he's still on a learning curve a little bit in terms of going through progressions as a passer, but I think the upside is there.
Yeah, what's interesting, Ross, is earlier I had Jake Ruse on, from UGAsports.com, and he called Fields a dedicated runner and said, he was a very a very aggressive, very straight ahead runner. And in a lot of ways, you watch him, and the time I saw him this year, he does look a lot like JT Barrett as a runner. He's a guy that sees the field very well. He picks his spots, and he gets upfield very quickly. And he's not the dynamic type of runner like a Kyler Murray or even as dynamic as maybe Tate Martell is, but he is very effective a runner. In a lot of ways, he has some of those intangibles as JT Barrett, and we obviously don't know what he's going to be like as a leader and running in the offense and everything. But as far as physical tools, he has some of those other intangibles like JT Barrett. But like you said, he also has the passing upside of a Dwayne Haskins.
Yeah, what a Dwayne Haskins does well is not just with his arm strength, but it's getting the ball out quickly and going through progressions. And again, I think Fields still probably has to show that he can do that. But I think that he reminds me a little bit when I watch him run of a mini Cam Newton. He's not quite that big, but I agree with you. I mean, he's a big, strong guy who's got some elusiveness, and certainly someone who you could run straightforward like JT Barrett.
What's
yardage.
Hilarious? That is hilarious, Ross, because that is the exact comparison that Jake used earlier. He said Cam Newton. He's not as big as Cam Newton, but similar style.
Yeah, similar style. He seems to have a little bit more juke, and I think he looks a little bit more of a fluid passer to me. I mean, I hate saying that about a true freshman versus a guy who's now starting in the NFL for a long time, but nevertheless, I think he's sort of, as I said, somewhere, I mean, in your ultimate upside, somewhere between a Watson and a Cam Newton. Yeah, he's not going to be a shifty runner necessarily, but he's a big, strong guy, and he's fast. He's gonna pick up yards both scrambling, and he will let you pick up short yardage and goal line with designed runs.
I want to run through a couple of these other scenarios here real fast because this is part of the whole package. We have to consider all of the scenarios, the what ifs here. Knowing what with the risk involved, them going after Justin Fields, we don't know, even if he goes to Ohio State, we don't know if he'll be immediately eligible because that'll be depending on the waiver. In your mind, is this a no-brainer? Should Ohio State continue to pursue this? And clearly they are pursuing it, or it seems that way. So what we say doesn't really matter. But in your mind, is this worth the risk for them, knowing the potential fallout, if he goes elsewhere or if he has to sit out, and whether or not Tate Martell transfers?
I do think it is, because I think the upside of the offense in terms of stretching the field, both with the 11-on-11 aspect of running the quarterback and being able to push the ball vertically down the field, is there with him. I think if let's just assume he is the starter next year at Ohio State, I think compared to this year, you'll see more use of the QB run game. You'll also see, Fields looks very fluid on RPOs, quick passes, quick outs, things where he can get the ball out. I think you'll see a little bit more of that. And, as I said, the developmental part will be sort of those mid-range, middle of the field throws. But, the ability to both be able to run your quarterback between the tackles and throw the ball deep is a pretty lethal combination. And I'm not sure that either Tate Martell, who's more of a runner, but obviously doesn't have the size to run inside like that, or Matthew Baldwin, who I think would be probably more towards the Haskins pass first side of things, can kind of combine those two traits.
In a scenario where Fields is not the starting quarterback next year, either because he has to sit out a year or because he picks Oklahoma or Florida State, do you see it as conceivable that Matthew Baldwin could be the starting quarterback ahead of Tate Martell if they're both on the roster? I've been saying I really believe the coaches like Baldwin a lot, maybe even more than Tate, and I think there's a chance for him to start, but I'm curious if you share that opinion.
I think he could be, sure. I think that obviously if you went into spring practice with Martell and Baldwin, I think that Tate would probably get the first reps or the first crack at it, so to speak. But I think, again, Ryan Day was correct yesterday or the other day in saying that, I think that you can adapt within the spread offense to both of those guys. That said, Martell's size is going to be a limiting factor to some extent, no matter what, both with as a runner. If he's going to be heavily that reliant on being a runner, you can do with running the quarterback. It's going to be tough to run him inside a bunch. And then just pushing the ball downfield, I think, is just going to remain a challenge. And, conversely, Baldwin's obviously been injured. But he may fit more seamlessly into what Day and what Ohio State did this year with Haskins.
Well, it has been an interesting month, and hopefully we'll get some clarity on this quarterback situation here in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, Ross, you have a good Christmas with your family, and we will definitely look forward to talking to you after the Rose Bowl and recapping what happened out there in Pasadena.
I appreciate it. Same to you.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
So Ryan Day's first recruiting class is partially wrapped up. It's his recruiting class in as much as he rescued it. Obviously, he did not do a large majority of the groundwork here. Urban Meyer and the entire staff, which, Day was, of course, part of. They did the groundwork. They did most of the work here to get the class built, but Ryan Day basically saved it. Like I said at the top, he lost only Jordan Battle here. Doug Nestor is still burbled. He did not sign here in the early signing period. Now, according to Ryan Day, there's probably room for another 4, 5, maybe 6 or 7 spots that they could fill here in the late signing period. And Doug Nestor, I'm sure Ohio State hopes would be part of that, those extra 5 or 6 spots. I'm sure they hope Nestor will be part of. But there's some offensive lineman prospects still out there, whether it's Nestor or there's Darnell Wright, who visited Ohio State several times last year. He's still available. Jonathan Allen is a guy out there, was committed to Indiana, I believe. There are some guys out there for Ohio State to get, but you got to like Ohio State's class because right now, as we sit, there are 16 commitments in this class. They signed 15 of those 16. Now, you just look, for instance, at the Rivals team rankings right now. Ohio State is sitting 20th. Other sites and other places, might have them a couple spots higher. But they're sitting 20th right now, and that's mostly because they only have 15 guys signed, 16 total commitments, where some of these other schools, Alabama has 26 total commitments, Texas A&M has 25, Oklahoma has 22, Georgia 22, Michigan, of course, who is ranked number 9 in the Rivals team rankings, has 27 commitments. So Ohio State is basically a victim of numbers right now because it's a smaller class currently. They're not as high as some of these other schools you see. But in terms of quality, and remember, quality is more important than quantity because the total numbers of scholarships are going to even out. Most teams are going to be sitting at 83 to 85 scholarships at this level in any given cycle. So Ohio State is more worried about quality right now, and they definitely have that. They're sitting 5th when you look at just a per-star average. Their per-star ranking right now is 3.75 stars when looking at the Rivals rankings. So in terms of quality, the Buckeyes are right where they need to be. It's funny. It really seems like all year long, even dating back to the summer, this 2019 class for Ohio State has felt so disappointing for Ohio State fans. And fans have remarked all year long how it just seems like a poor class and people are frustrated with it. But when you look at the final result, the per-star ranking, the per-player average, this is up there with some of a normal Urban Meyer class. I'm not saying it's not the best. He's had a couple that have been better, but this is an average Urban Meyer class. And not only is it an average Urban Meyer class, but Urban, of course, retired a few weeks ago, and Ryan Day is the guy that was able to come in and keep the status quo. He was able to keep this class together. And, of course, on signing day, they were able to add Zach Harrison. And that was a big get for Ohio State. Look, Harrison, let's just be out with this about expectations. Harrison, in terms of polish, in terms of immediate expectation, everything I hear about the guy, I would not put him in the category of a Chase Young or a Nick Bosa or even a Joey Bosa. He's not a guy, I think, that is ready to come in and make that kind of immediate impact that some of those guys have made. But his measurables and his his physical traits and his talent level and athleticism, these things are off the charts. And that is what made him a top 5 player in this class, is his potential. He's not there yet. He was very inconsistent. People that have watched Olentangy Orange with any regularity will say, they will say they don't always, like people that come in, actually the people that come in and just see him at times, they will not understand what the big deal is. They don't understand the hype, okay? If you come in and watch him just once or twice, I know people that have walked away saying, I don't get it, but if you see him with regularity, you see more flashes and you see why he's rated as highly as he is. He has that polish, he has the skill level, or he doesn't have the polish, but he has the skill level. So, look, I think Harrison is a big get, not just because Ohio State was able to get a guy with NFL rush end potential, but also because they were able to keep that potential away from rivals Michigan and Penn State. That was another big reason why this guy was important, because he may hit and he may miss. We don't know what he's going to do at Ohio State. Most 5-stars do tend to work out, but not every single one does. But because they were able to not only get him, but they were able to keep the rivals from getting him and having that potential star, that potential playmaker on defense that can disrupt an offense. And I think that was as big of a deal for Ohio State as whether or not he lives up to his billing. So anyhow, this is a great recruiting class for Ohio State, not because, obviously not because of numbers, not even because of per star average, but just because they were able to keep the status quo. And I really believe Ryan Day will have a chance now to go back to the 2020 class, and they lost all the mojo and the momentum that they had with the 2020 kids. But there's a lot of time for that to find itself coming around. And if they can land Justin Fields and then go out and start building momentum again with recruits in the 2020 class, look out. I think Ryan Day, I said it last week, I said it when he was hired, I think Ryan Day is a star in the making. I think he's going to be a rock star. And I think just being able to keep this class together and then maybe turn around in short order and add a 5-star quarterback in Justin Fields on the transfer market who could be immediately eligible, I think great things doing here for Ohio State football. So that is going to wrap up our coverage here of football. We will obviously stay focused on everything going on with Justin Fields and anything that happens here with recruiting over the next 2 months until the February signing period. Just a quick reminder, Ohio State basketball, I did not get to today, but the Buckeyes do take on UCLA Saturday afternoon, 3:30 on CBS as part of the CBS Sports Classic. That is between Ohio State, UCLA, and Chicago. They are the first part of the doubleheader, which, of course, North Carolina, Kentucky will follow them. So we will talk about the Buckeyes, how they perform against UCLA on Monday. We'll also start to get into some Rose Bowl coverage. We will have a Christmas Eve podcast coming at you Monday, probably an abbreviated edition. And then on next Friday, before New Year's, we'll really start to get into the nuts and bolts of the Rose Bowl matchup with Washington. So I look forward to everybody coming back and spending your holidays with us. Please give us a listen, and we will definitely be back on Monday. You can catch me on Twitter at KYLam8 if you do not already do so, and you can catch the show every Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com. You can also find and follow us and rate and review us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, or Stitcher. So appreciate the listen, everybody. We'll be back to you on Monday with more Buckeye coverage. And, of course, we hope you have a good holiday season if you do not catch us on Monday or next Friday. Have a great weekend, everybody. Go Buckeyes.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.